At some point, you realize your biggest leadership constraint isn't strategy or skill, it's ego myopia, not seeing and regulating your ego in real time. Today on the Mike Method, I'm sitting down with Eric Kaufmann, chairman of the board at Dr. Bronner's, executive coach to leaders at places like Verizon, Facebook, SunPower, and Circle, and the creator of the conscious operating system designed to make the invisible visible, the subtle ego patterns that quietly hijack decisions, slow teams down, and wreck trust. Eric blends hard-edge executive rigor with 4 decades of Zen training, including a year-long solo retreat in a mountain cabin he built himself. And in this conversation, we get practical fast. Why people-pleasing is a power leak, how boundaries and requests are the adult-to-adult operating system for relationships and teams, why say more might be the most underrated leadership move on earth, and how curiosity becomes the ultimate antidote to defensiveness and certainty. We also unpack the 3 ego needs: to be right, to be liked, and to have might, and the upgrade path Eric teaches: wisdom, love, and innate power. So your yeses become a full body yes, and your leadership stops leaking energy into lukewarm commitments. Let's dive in. Eric, I really appreciate you making time to be on the podcast today.
I'm excited to be here, Mike, for real.
So, we were introduced by Jennifer Hill, who I have a lot of time and energy for. She was on the podcast recently. And as soon as she introduced us, I went to your website and found your conscious operating system. And I found that sort of led me down the rabbit hole of trying to find out, like, why was being conscious as a leader, why had you decided to do an assessment just off of that, and what was the history behind that? So I'd love for you to tell listeners the story of how you realized that conscious leadership was where you wanted to put your heartbeats into, and how did that lead to the assessment?
Great question. So there's a lot of, you know this better than most humans, right? There's so many different dimensions of what it means to be in leadership role. And a lot of my work is with executives in particular. And there's no way to sort of escape the realization, if you've done this long enough, that there are skills and there's ways you do things. And then there are sort of a way of being, how you show up, right? And if you can have remarkable skills, that's fabulous. But if your skills in strategic thinking, team building, financial planning, problem solving, right? Those are the skills, right? If those are not coming with a package of how you're being, what people around you relate to, the people, meaning your team, right? And we're still working with humans, they're relating to the way you're being. They're respecting your knowledge, but they're really engaging with you as a human. And so that human dimension is what sort of broadly we can put in this category of sort of being conscious, right? And being conscious, we could go down a fabulous rabbit hole of what is consciousness and what it is to be conscious. But to avoid that, I would say that what I found, and this is what shows up in the assessment, what I found is that the number one barrier to effective executive function, right? The number one way that executives get in their own way is what I came to call ego myopia. Ego myopia, not seeing it and regulating one's ego in real time. And if you look around at all the various sort of challenges and breakdowns in organizations, whether it's communication breakdown, decision flow, effective innovation, new strategy, team cohesion, do you have my back? Do I feel safe? Psychological safety. We can point all that back to some version or another of this ego myopia, not being able to see and regulate the ego. And so the idea of conscious in this dimension means that there is less of that ego myopia. And so the assessment came around after 20 some odd years of doing this work and saying, well, can we actually sort of formulate what ego myopia looks like and then measure it and then use that measurement to form some kind of a developmental pathway so that executives who have these remarkable skills can also have a clearer way to engage with their people and to affect what they're passionate about.
Yeah, you raise an interesting point because, we can't escape who we are in the room. And so, if somebody's using a format for strategic thinking or a conflict resolution format or difficult conversations, or, they're trying to give feedback or they're trying to coach someone, if their ego is getting in the way and they aren't aware of how their ego has entered the room, then knowing those tools and techniques they're not going to work. Like they're going to fall flat. The reaction you're going to see from the other person isn't going to be what you're expecting to see. A lot of times people think that something is being done to them, like they won't like it, how it's going. So, having that level of awareness, of self-awareness of, and I think in some cases, have I been triggered too, right? Like, has something the person said triggered me, in which case now, I might have an automatic response or reaction that kicks in. And
Yeah.
all of that sounds like it's ego based.
And it's true as you're describing it, right? It's spot on. It's also true whenever sort of I find myself sideways with my wife. There's something
Right.
about my own stuff with my daughters, with my parents, with my friends, with myself. And it's not just individual, it's collective, right? So the
Yeah.
reason we sort of do this assessment, not just individually, but at the team level, is everybody's now playing this game. Everybody's got their ego myopia, right? And I'm not saying ego myopia is some kind of a deficit in the human being. I'm saying it's, to your point, right? It's a human feature. It's a feature of our humanity. And so I'm not pathologizing it. I'm just saying we can identify it and we can be more intentional and more skilled at how we can, what I call, correct that ego myopia. So the ego doesn't go away.
Mm-hmm.
Certainly, I don't know how to do that.
Mm-hmm.
I just don't. I think that's a myth. The ego doesn't die; it doesn't go away. But we can evolve, we can grow, and we can do that intentionally. And that's at the heart of my work. Similar to you, right? We'll do strategy planning for organizations. We do operating sort of systems for organizations. But I kept coming back again and again and again, where smart, competent, driven, ambitious, creative people just going freaking sideways. And most of it is because they just can't see it. So here's a way to make it visible. And then people go, oh God, what do I do with this? Well, there's things you can do, but
Yeah.
it's a really fabulous gift to be illuminated, right? Awareness is power. Awareness is also vulnerability, right? Because if I become aware of something I didn't know about myself that other people knew, because most of the stuff that the stuff I'm not aware of, doesn't mean the rest of my team's not aware of it.
Yeah.
Right. And so when I become aware of it, it's like, crap, how's that? How has this been happening? So there's a bit of and this is where it might sometimes fall short. Self-awareness requires both courage and some humility. And I think courage and humility are remarkable virtues to come by and not automatically installed in all of us.
There's a great model that describes in detail what you were just talking about with respect to awareness, where, I'm aware of certain things about myself. My team is aware of certain things about me. And then there's areas where my team doesn't know something about me. I don't know something about me, sort of this unknown area called the Johari window. And it's not new. We'll drop a link in the show notes to sort of express what that model is. And it does a very good job of helping people understand that they've got a private self, things that they only know about themselves. And then they've got a public self where there are things that other people know about them. Then they've got this unknown self. It's like other things. It's like a blind spot area, right? Like people know this about me, but I don't know about this about me, right? That's the blind spot. Then you've got this area of unknown where I don't know this about me and other people don't know this about me. And that's an incredible, both the blind spots and the sort of unknown region in the Johari window are these wonderful areas for exploration. That's where feedback really comes into play. When you're getting great feedback, it helps you with the blind spots. But the more you increase the size of your public self, which is basically becoming more authentic, and the more you increase or decrease your blind spots, which is asking for feedback, the lesser chance there is that there is a hidden unknown, something that either can be getting in your way or will potentially come to bite you when you're least expecting it.
Yeah, no, I love that. The Johari window is a beautiful model. And again, we really should be introducing this to all people, right? This is not just a leadership thing, right?
It's not just a business thing. Yeah.
Every family ought to be doing this over, Friday night meal and sort of, but I think what the conscious operating system assessment in particular, and what my framework in general adds to that conversation is, well, feedback is me receiving, right?
Right.
But clarity about the why is not always obvious from the feedback. So there's a model out there to sort of riff on models right now called the SDI, the Strength Deployment Inventory. I don't know if you're familiar with that assessment tool. And they do a fabulous job sort of showing motivations and things of that nature. And I had a conversation with their head scientist, as it were, some years ago, and we were talking about motivation, right? And he said, well, if you see somebody over on that table eating lunch, why are they eating lunch? And I would say, well, they're hungry. And he would say, well, they could be hungry, but maybe it's just the only time they have. Maybe they're stressed. Maybe it's a social thing. Maybe they're addicted to their food. So we can see what's happening, but we don't know how to assign the motive, right?
Mm-hmm.
Conversely, when we get feedback, people are telling us what they're seeing, but they don't necessarily know why we're doing it. And one of the nice things about this operating system assessment, this conscious operating assessment, is that it digs in a little bit deeper into your structure of belief, right? So
Mm-hmm.
this ego construct, which I talk about, these three primary drivers of the ego. And so once you unpack that and you can start to see what's happening, the path to choices, right? Do I want to do it differently? Becomes much more broad, right? Because you can't do something different if you don't know how to choose differently. And you can't choose differently if you don't have more discernment about what's happening. So that's part of what the clients have been really excited about, right? Is to say,
Mm-hmm.
oh my God, so this is how I've come around to doing that. Not, like, for example, working with an executive team, and we did the assessment, and they found that distributed highly among this particular team, there's a high presence of people pleasing. Right. So now we can measure people pleasing, right? It's actually a thing, and it fits in my framework. There's three needs: a need to be right, a need to be liked, and a need to have might, right? And so people pleasing is actually a power leak. It's in the need to have might, but it leaks your power. Think about it. I
Mm-hmm.
do people pleasing. I'm literally giving away my power, right? But when everyone started seeing their own people pleasing, like, in print and how they're going about it. And the opposite of people pleasing in our framework isn't being a jerk. And there's plenty of
Mm-hmm.
that. We don't need to introduce that. The sort of the corollary to people pleasing is being authentic, to your point, right? So once they saw how frequent people pleasing and what we can do to bring in more authenticity, which is to say, to ask for things in real time, to express what's really happening, to have permission between the folks. We're not going to people please. We're actually going to have a legitimate, authentic, deep expression of what we need, what we want, what we don't need. The decision time in that team went down by 60%, like within a month. They were suddenly able to actually get things done instead of the people pleasing. So, but the prior feedback to the CEO would have been, you're taking too long to make a decision.
Right.
It doesn't have nuance. Like, so what do I do about it? And that's the nice thing about the assessment.
There's another antidote to people pleasing in radical candor, where if executive teams are being too nice to each other, they need to move to a place of challenging, caring deeply, and then challenging directly. And the challenging directly thing means holding people accountable, being very clear and specific about feedback that they're providing. And a lot of nice executive teams just won't touch that because they're worried about the social repercussions. It goes against people pleasing. And I find that models a simple way for exec teams to start to understand where they can migrate to, as opposed to being stuck in that people pleasing place.
Yeah, no, I love what you're saying. The people pleasing and other of its ilk is, again, from my perspective, it's a power leak. And when I say power, what do I mean? I don't mean like, oh, I am powerful, I am He-Man. But
Yeah.
what I mean is innate power, the capacity to be present and authentic and self-expressed,
Yeah.
right? So that when I'm in my power, my genius can shine. When I'm
Right.
in my power, what's really meaningful can come forward. When I'm in my power, I'm living by my values, right? So that's what I mean by innate power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's kind of a clean power. And to your point, to make requests, to set boundaries, those are beautiful sort of expressions of clean power, as opposed to sort of manipulative or destructive or cumulative. And so the more we can move groups of people, teams, families, certainly, executive teams, to the place where they are having these sort of authentic, empowered, personally empowered, right? Innate power conversations, the smoother everything flows, right? The less games you have to play, the less time you have to waste.
It's doing that word boundaries. I think sometimes it has like a negative connotation to it where people think, oh, this person is so boundaried or they're putting up a boundary. And the reality is that, like, think about boundaries in any relationship. Boundaries are the way that I can take care of myself and be in relationship with another person or with a team. They're kind of similar to that theory that creativity thrives within constraints. Relationships thrive within boundaries, because if everyone is clear on what their boundaries are and I'm willing to hold people accountable when they step outside of that, then I can't build up resentment, because quiet resentment is something that slowly really destroys relationships. And it's typically from unmet expectations, which are unspoken boundaries.
Yeah, and that's a beautiful description, Mike. What is that statement? Good fences make good neighbors. You've
Right.
heard that one,
I hadn't heard that. That's great though.
right?
Yeah.
Good fences make good neighbors is sort of that's what comes to mind as you were describing the
Yeah.
boundaries.
Yeah.
And it's such an interesting, and I've thought about boundaries and I've researched boundaries and I've looked at it for many years, both as a professional, right, as an academic in my own book writing and research, and as a human being in my own life.
Yeah.
And one of the things I thought a lot about is whether that's a particularly like Western thing. Is that like a
Yeah.
Judeo-Christian thing, and not
Sure.
really like is it a cultural feature because like Japan or Korea is more of a collectivist and we're more of an individualist? And the answer that I've sort of arrived at is no, it's not a cultural thing. It's a human thing. There are different expressions, to be sure,
Mm-hmm.
but you make a really important point, I think, around the resentment on the one side, right? And what you didn't mention, but I think is implied, sort of the burnout on the other. Right. So if I'm not effectively boundaried, right? If I can't say no, look, I'll put it this way, and I write this and I love this idea, the quality of your yes is in direct proportion to the clarity of your no.
The quality of your yes is in direct proportion to the clarity of your no.
Think about it, right? Because, or let me put this in a different way. That we'll take it out of the personal for a moment. We'll put it in. We talked about strategy, strategic
Yeah.
planning, right? So one of my first mentors had impressed upon me that strategy is the art of exclusion.
Okay.
Strategy is the art of exclusion, right? What we do
Right.
with strategy is we say we have X resource, we have X market, we have X, ambitions. So what are we going to do to be able to move our resources to create value in the space? I'm oversimplifying, but that's sort of what strategy is, right? Which means there's 10,000 things we're not going to do. And the degree to which we can be successful is the degree to which we highly focus on the things we said yes to in the strategy and equally boundary out, right? Or sort of block out the things we said no to. So that's a strategy kind of, and everyone I think gets it from a strategy perspective, right? Because
Yeah, for sure.
you've
You
been
don't
at
have
this for a long
unlimited
time,
time. You don't have unlimited resources. We got
right?
to put the best and highest use case forward for moving our strategy forward. We don't want people's energy diffused, all those things, right?
Beautiful, right? Exactly. And you and I have bumped around these places. What are people constantly looking for? What are our priorities, right? Every team, every department and division wants to know from the executives, what are our priorities? And if I don't have priorities, oh my God, it's so stressful, right? So these are all discussions about boundaries at the strategic level, at the organizational level. So let's take it to the personal level, right? If I am not effectively saying no, then my yeses are weak. They're porous. They break down.
Mm-hmm.
And so the only other thing I would add is I think it's great to learn how to set boundaries, which is a sense of no or not now or not this way, right? But to your point about the resentment, the other side of that, and that's still part of this innate power, is making requests. So there's two things that will essentially express my innate power. One is I'm going to say, no, this is not the right fit. I'm not the right person. It's not the right time, whatever the case might be. That's a boundary, right? Doesn't fit my values. So that's one side. That's the yang side of it, or the yin side of it. The yang side of it is, this is what I need. This is what I'd like. This is what I would like to experience, like to have, like to be, like to do. And when we combine the sort of the no thank you with that, can I have this please? It's a very adult to adult dynamic, right? Which is one of the things that, one of these models of, what is it, transactional, what is it? The transactional analysis, moving from, child, parent, child to adult
Yes.
to adult. A lot of the work that I'm in, and I suspect you're in as well, is like, how do we get to this adult to adult dialogue? And adults set boundaries and adults make respect.
I like the request feature of this because I think the having boundaries is one thing, but not asking for what you want is another way of having an unmet expectation.
100%.
Right. So like it's an unspoken expectation of the other person, both the boundary and the request, if they aren't spoken to, which both can lead to resentment. And the other person doesn't even know this is going on. Like, how are people supposed to know my expectations or my requests or know my boundaries if they're not spoken to? It's not fair.
It's not fair, is that what you said?
Right? Like, yeah, it's not fair. Like, I mean, it's not fair. Like, I find that with my wife, right? Like, I realize if I have a boundary, I need to state it to her so that that's clear. Or it's like or I'm holding up something that she doesn't even know is there. And then on the other side, if I have an expectation or request and I don't ask for it, and then I get frustrated, that's not fair either because she didn't even know that was something that I wanted or something I needed support with, right?
So I was having a conversation with my wife last night, as a matter of fact, now that you sort of bring that in, right? And
Yeah.
there's a situation going on. She's frustrated with a certain person's behavior, and this has been going on for a long time, right? And she decided she's going to set boundaries around this person. And so she did. And now she's sort of letting the boundaries kind of get crept upon, And so we were literally talking, it was late last night, and I said, well, you said you would. I see you're frustrated. And of course, when my wife gets frustrated,
Yeah.
I'm
You're
that
in it.
guy, right? I'm like, God damn it, let's do something about this. But it was interesting because she said, I just don't want to talk about it.
Right.
Which is kind of an interesting moment in a marriage. It's not an unheard of thing, right? I just don't want to talk about it. And I was like, okay, I'm going to respect her and not talk about it, but that doesn't meet my needs,
Yes.
right? So she's setting a boundary, but I have a request. And so I literally said, I get that you don't want to talk about it, babe, but this is lingering. I think there's something you're doing here that's unskillful, and it's ultimately, bouncing back on me. I really want to talk about this.
Right.
And she's like, well, it's late. I said, I get it, but we got nowhere else to go.
Yeah.
Can we spend 5 minutes and have this conversation? So
Sure.
she said, okay. So, but you know what I'm saying? This dynamic between boundaries and requests, I mean, that's the dance of two humans being in a dialogue, in a relationship, right? And I think that's what executives, leaders of all organizations do. They're in this dynamic dance of a relationship. And so finding our way to having these sort of mature, on the level, open, I was going to say non-reactive. I just don't know how to say that. That's ridiculous. But
I think the word we could use is responsive. Like, as opposed to non-reactive, we could say like a reaction is kind of like, I've been triggered. I have this automatic reaction. I may regret that reaction later. Whereas being responsive is actually taking even like a quick breath before I decide how I'm going to respond, and then think to myself, like, will I be okay with this response later? And then I have my response. Although I will say that one of the trickiest things, though, is that if it's something I'm truly triggered by, I can't usually come up with a response in the moment. I need to have a pre-planned response, because the reaction is such a like neurological pathway. It's just kind of like hardwired. This happens and I react this way. This happens, I react this way. So I need to, before that trigger occurs again, I need to have a response, which I want that to be the response, but I got to know what it is. Because if I don't have any option, I have an option, and it's my default reaction.
So how do you, like, I'm trying to imagine there's probably a small set of things which would trigger you that strongly, right? I mean, or because you're not going to have prepared stuff for everything, right? There's probably
No.
How do you set which to prepare for?
Yeah, you kind of want to, I mean, how I would think about it is, or how I do think about it is, like, what are the things that trigger me? So for instance, if somebody says you never or you always, 100% that's a trigger. And the reaction is a defensiveness. Like, that's ridiculous. You say always or never, but I did this many times, right? Like, that's like an automatic pattern. So when somebody says to me, you always do this, or my response to that is, you're right, I have done that frequently. What would you prefer that I do? And then it puts it back to that person to be very clear, because clearly they have an expectation there that I don't know about, or it's a boundary, but either way, they have some unmet want or need, right? But my default is to go to like prove that statement is wrong place. Now I'm just in conflict with the other person. It's just not useful.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. So I'm thinking about like what has worked for me and what works with folks that I work with. Having that prepared for sure. And then I find sort of the magic phrase, as it were, not that there really are magic phrases, because if I say a magic phrase, it's going to be always or never, right? but there's a phrase that I have found really effective, and I found many people have found effective, which is I just pause and I say more. You always screw this up. You never follow up, which to me says the other person is completely out of their minds, because they know that's not true.
Sure.
Anyone who's, they just know it's not true, but they're triggered, right? And they're triggering. Now they're coming to me, goes, you never did, you always, and I'm like, you son of a bitch, I do too. So instead of that, I can take a breath and I go, I hear you. Say more.
Say more, or I'd love to hear more about that, or tell me more. All of those versions of that statement, I think, are great, because it's an open-ended question. It's not defensive. It's got curiosity built into it. It allows the other person to maybe more accurately describe what they said. Because I will say that most people met with that open-ended question of, could you say more? Could you share more? Will 100% back down from always or never. Like, they won't use that word in the follow-up. They will more clearly articulate what it is that they are struggling with.
Yeah,
And that leads to a conversation as opposed to like a battle of who's right. And I
exactly.
think, to your prior question about, wanting to be right, I think, in most relationships, we have to pick between being right and being happy. And if we're pretty grounded in our ego, then we're probably going to choose wanting to be right. Like, I'm going to win this argument. I'm going to show you that always doesn't apply and never doesn't apply. Versus your approach, which I really love, the approach of, say more, tell me more, I'd like to hear more, gives people the opportunity to actually be happy as opposed to just
And
feeling right.
yeah, I mean, there's a couple of things you said that really fascinated to me, right? One, you're exactly right. I mean, my point is, so I still have my ego, right? But for me,
Yeah.
not my own ego myopia,
Right.
I have to lean in and not just
Right.
defend. Because the classic definition of being in an ego is I'm going to throw up my shield and I'm going to either
Yeah.
defend myself or attack you, right? Those are the two
Yeah.
things. So, I mean, but you used a word that is kind of as far as I'm concerned, we're talking about awareness, we're talking about consciousness, we're
Yeah.
talking about being more adult or more responsive, responsible. You put a word in there that I think is one of the most critical human features in this whole piece, and woefully underused, available to everyone, wildly popular when we're young and then diminishing as we get older. And you
Yeah.
use the word curiosity.
Yeah.
you know and we look
Yeah.
at kids. You have kids, I had kids, right? We look at kids when we were kids, everything was like, what, why is the
Yeah.
sky blue, how does this work, what is this thing, that's amazing. And then as we get sort of trained to be, our culture prefers certainty over
Yes.
ambiguity, right? So
Yep.
certainty extracts curiosity and puts in its place data, right? And now we're sort
Yep.
of going around with data and with frameworks and certainty. Curiosity is the hack of all hacks for consciousness. If you
Mm-hmm.
think about self-awareness, you can't grow in self-awareness without curiosity. If you think about service and humility to others, that's a form of curiosity, because I have to figure out what the other wants in order to be in service to them. If you think
Empathy.
about gift giving, right?
Yeah.
What do you care about? And I'll give you that. I'll be curious about you. I'll give you the gift. You will love the gift. How do I get curiosity is the hack of all hacks,
Yeah.
and
I think that's very,
because
very well said.
and because it's been like systemically extracted from us, we end up being defensive and certain. You never do this. Now, I certainly do this. You're wrong. Versus, hey, say more. I can
Yeah.
see you're frustrated with me. Say a few more words about what's going on for you, right? I can be curious.
It's such an antidote. I think you're right. I think it is such an antidote to defensiveness to actually get curious and try to understand, because, that's really grounded in empathy, right? Like, we can't really understand others. We can imagine that we understand others. We can imagine what they're thinking. Usually we're wrong, or we're close, but we're not 100% right. A lot of times we're just wrong because as human beings, we're judgment making machines. We have to craft this narrative to get through the day. Like, I'm going to assume that everybody's going to agree that yellow line down the road, that we're going to drive on the right sides of that line, and we're not going to
Thank God for that, by the way. Yeah.
right. You know what I mean? Like, we're just, yeah. So we have to judge these things, but make some assumptions. But I think, as you say, curiosity is key to that. I want to touch back on something you mentioned earlier, because I think it's really important. It's around yeses. And I think, so Frances Fry's done a bunch of work at Harvard around strategy and around trying to do too many things. And her sort of concept is, if you want to be at a 5 out of 5 on everything, then you're going to be a 3 out of 5 on everything. So if you try to tackle all the possibilities that are out there, you're going to maybe get average results on everything at best. But if you say, well, I'm going to be a 0 out of 5 on some things, then I can be a 5 out of 5 on other things. And when that comes back to saying yes, I think the reality is that yeses are really expensive, and they're expensive because they're typically there's no monetary attachment to them, but they actually are expensive. So if somebody came to us and said, well, can I have X, just give me X amount of money? We would probably say, well, why? We'd have a lot of questions. We would be very careful before we said yes to that. But if somebody comes to us for our time, it's very easy for us to say yes to it, because it really doesn't feel like there's a value to that time, like a numerical number to that. It's just kind of a request or a favor, or, asked to be on some panel, or who knows, all sorts of yeses that come in, requests that come in to our lives. And Greg McKeown wrote this wonderful book called Essentialism. And in this book, he said, the reality is that we say a lot of lukewarm yeses to things in life, and particularly when it's far off. So if we all look in our calendars, like look at your calendar right now, look at April and look at mid-April, and then look at any week in, look at the midweek of April, and you're like, yeah, my calendar's wide open. So if somebody asked for our time right now, then we would probably say yes. But the problem is that we could say yes very quickly without thinking about the cost of that yes. Now imagine, look at your calendar this week, because your April calendar will probably look almost identical, but it doesn't right now, but it will when you get there. If that was request you said yes to happen this week, would you still want to do it? And if the answer is no, that's a lukewarm yes. And Greg McKeown's concept was we need to say no to almost everything so that we can say a hell yes to the things that really matter. And he's got a wonderful framework in the book that's kind of like, it helps you create a filter for like, what is a hell yes? Like what factors or what qualities does something have to have for it actually to be a hell yes for me? And once you understand that and you look at the energy that's required to say a hell yes. And I'll give you an example from parenting. Like if you're exhausted at the end of the day or on the weekends and you're doing something with your children and you're bringing the very worst energy with you because you've said too many lukewarm yeses during the week. Now you're saying a lukewarm yes to your family or to your kids because that's all you have left. Yeah. And so the question then becomes, well, what could I have said no to this week so that when I showed up for my family or my kids, I was a huge hell yes. Same could be true for meetings during the week. If there's really important meetings that are happening during the week, but my whole calendar is full of lukewarm yeses, then when I get to those really important meetings that I should be a hell yes about, I bring a blasé kind of like meh energy to them because it's literally all I have left to give. Yeah. And so the art of saying no, which is a very difficult thing for a lot of people. And you mentioned people pleasing before. So those really hard for people pleasers. Getting good at that and getting good at having creative ways of saying no, as opposed to just a hard no, even though, let's be clear, no is a full and complete sentence. But getting good at being able to deal with different ways of saying no, particularly I say in a business context, it's more likely to happen just because we spend most of our time Monday to Friday doing that. So I just wanted to come back to this, yes, because you brought it up earlier and I'm like, it's such a powerful word, but it's such an expensive word.
It's such a great point you're bringing up, Mike. I love it. There's hell yes, right? And what are the criteria for that? There's another approach that Gay Hendricks had put out, the Hendricks Institute, and Diana Chapman sort of talks a lot about this in her work, but they talk about a full body yes.
Okay.
A full body yes, sort of a somatic approach. So rather than sort of a lift, it's a somatic, like when somebody asks you this, like close your eyes and feel into your body. Is it a full body yes? Is my body moving towards this, or am I hesitating or even pulling back, right? So there's that full body yes, that hell yeah kind of a request. And it's a very tall order. I mean, that is a level of maturity that is quite significant to be able to be both that attuned and that authentic, right? Because I have to be able to note that it's not a full body yes, it's a maybe, and then I can acquire more, I can reject, I can change, I can modify, I can say no, or it's a full body yes. The question then continues to be, well, why are people making a lukewarm yes, spending all that energy and effort coming back to their family and being the worst version of themselves, right? It's kind of a sad thing, right? You're this amazing leader all day long. You show up on the weekend and you are the worst version for your family. That's a bit sad, right? And so that's not uncommon. And then, so again, in the framework of this conscious leadership piece and from the ego myopia, there's three essential kind of fears that are banging around all us humans, right? And it's the fear of failure. I don't want to look, powerless and stupid. It's the fear of failure. I just don't want to I don't want to lose control. It's a fear of failure, right? There's a fear of humiliation. I don't want to look bad. And there's a fear of rejection. I don't want to be in the out group. And that fear of rejection, fear of humiliation, fear of failure sort of constantly jibber-jabbering in our heads and causes us to say yes when we should be saying no. And that's often the case. And so in my work and in our work, we're saying, okay, how do we move from that fear of failure, fear of humiliation, fear of rejection, which then I call the three ego needs. The need to be right, is to avoid the fear of humiliation, right? The need to be liked is to avoid the fear of rejection. And the need to have might is to avoid the fear of failure. Mm-hmm. And then the corollary to those are, how do we move from that? From the need to be right becomes wisdom, grows into matures in wisdom. The need to be liked becomes love, and the need to have might becomes power. So wisdom, love, and power become the three anchors of what it means to be a living, conscious leader, right? And we can cultivate wisdom, love, and power in the same way that we can mitigate the need to be right, the need to be liked, and the need to have might. Then people can walk around with a clearer sense of themselves, of each other, of the system, of the process, of their goals, of their aspirations, and make those yeses be hell yes, or full body yeses. Save their time, use their intelligence in the best way possible, and make the contributions they want to make.
And ladies and gentlemen, that's Eric's mic drop. That was a powerful way for us to wrap, my friend. That was so good. Thank you for this, Eric. I really appreciate you making time to share your wisdom, your knowledge, and experience with the listeners today.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks for the opportunity.